This is the IdeaPlus dip pen. Overall, it's made of two main components, a long wooden handle and a stainless steel nib, but you can purchase this with a brass nib as well. The tip of the nib has kind of a bullet-shaped design, which is there to give you a variety of line thicknesses depending on the angle at which you write with the pen. As we work towards the bottom of the nib, we see a series of grooves, which is there to collect ink and allow you to write longer in between dips. The nib is held into the holder with a rubber grommet. If you hold the nib and pull it straight out, it should come apart. And towards the bottom of the nib, we can see the only branding for the pen. In order to reinsert the nib, you line it up with this grommet and push it straight in. And then the handle has a long tapering design to a rounded off edge. In the front, we can see a little indent, which is there to act as a gripping location. In the hand, it's very lightweight and very comfortable with a center of gravity towards the tip of my fingers. There is no cap or anything to act as a roll stop, so when I'm not using this pen, I tend to rest it on a pen stand or I might put it in a pen case. In terms of size comparisons, here's the IdeaPlus dip pen, a typical Pilot G2 rollerball pen, and your standard Sharpie. Before demonstrating how to use the IdeaPlus dip pen, I want to take a moment to compare it with a few other models. First up, I have the Mahjong N8, and unlike the IdeaPlus, this one is made out of a turned acrylic. It also features a cap to protect the nib, and we can see that the nib is a glass nib as opposed to the stainless steel. It doesn't provide you line variations, you're only able to write with this tip. But you are able to unscrew this nib from the grip section and swap in a regular fountain pen housing, in which case you've converted this pen into a regular fountain pen. When it's uncapped, we can see the overall length is quite a bit shorter than the IdeaPlus, but the cap is able to post. It screws to post on the back, in which case it converts this into a length that's very comparable to the IdeaPlus. Next, I have the Jinhao 82. Now this pen by default is a fountain pen, however you can purchase it with a glass nib. And when it's uncapped, we can also see that it's pretty short compared to these other two pens. But again, you can post this cap, in which case it converts it to a pretty comparable length to these other two. And then I wanted to pull in a standard fountain pen as well. This is the Lamy Safari. I have it here in terracotta. In the cap form, we can see its overall length is pretty much the same as the rest. The cap pulls off in this case. And when it's uncapped, we can see it's a bit shorter than the rest of these pens. And then the cap does post deeply and securely, but in its posted form, it turns into a much longer pen. One other important thing to note, the IdeaPlus is the only pen on the table that doesn't have a clip or something to act as a roll stop. In order to demonstrate how the IdeaPlus dip pen performs, I decided I'm going to do some ink swatching today, and I've pulled in my collection of Waterman inks. So in order to do this, we are going to need some tools. We of course have our dip pen and our inks. I'm also going to keep some fresh water on the side, as well as some index cards to swatch our inks. And here I'm using Exacompta, which is made by Clairefontaine. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, to start things off, I'm pulling in Waterman Tender Purple. This has become one of my favorite purple inks to use. It has a lot of nice saturation, which is something that we see on a lot of the Waterman inks. I'm making sure I'm getting a good dip in here, and we'll go ahead and write the name. Again, this is called Tender Purple. And then in order to show off the ink, I'm going to hold this at a more extreme angle and give it a swatch. Took a little bit of turn to get that ink to flow. So I'm making sure that I'm turning it as I go. You can see it gets you a much wider line when you hold it at that extreme angle, but it does take a little bit of practice in order to get that ink to come out. Now I've rotated this pen a few times. Oh, there's another bit of ink coming out there. And what I found is it dries up as you use the different grooves on this pen. I'm gonna go ahead and dip this pen to clean off the nib. Next up, I have Waterman's green ink. This one they call Harmonious Green. They all come in this nice kind of hexagonal design, which allows you to tip the ink on one of its facets if it's getting low. We'll go ahead and dip our nib. I like to try to rotate the nib as I write in order to make sure I'm using up the ink in the different grooves. I did notice quite a bit of ink came out initially. That does tend to happen with this pen. There's something with that groove feature where sometimes they collect a lot more ink than others. Let's go ahead and do some wider strokes. You can kind of feel when it starts drying out, it gets a little more scratchy. Go ahead and dip our pen. Next up is a real staple in the fountain pen industry. This is Serenity Blue, and this is actually my second bottle of this ink. I use it on a lot of vintage pens. I also try to use it on nearly every new pen that I have because it is such a well-performing ink that it gives me a good baseline. I'm gonna see if wiping the nib a little bit on that ink bottle helps with avoiding that burping. Yeah, that looks a lot nicer. Just a beautiful, well-saturated blue ink. It does have a bit of red sheen. We'll see if that comes across on this swatch when it dries. It looks like I've used up, oh, there's a little bit more ink right there. Looks like I've used up most of it though. And to close out my Waterman collection, I have Intense Black. This is another very well saturated ink. It is obviously black by the name of it, but it's one that I enjoy using on a lot of my vintage pens as well. It's a safe black ink that cleans up very easily with water. We'll go ahead and do a little swatch. I think that has used up the ink on the nib. And there we have it, my 4 Waterman inks. Let's take a closer look. Again, this is Tender Purple, Harmonious Green. You can see that ink splatter at the top is still wet. It has been a few minutes, but it's still quite shiny up there. Serenity Blue, and Intense Black. So what do I think of the IdeaPlus dip pen? There are many aspects of this pen that I really like. I think it's very cool to be able to have such a wide variety of line widths depending on the angle at which you're holding the pen. You can see it's very useful in ink swatching, but it also could be very useful if you're practicing calligraphy or if you're learning Eastern style scripts, which have a lot of hand motions. Also, I find the handle is both attractive and very functional. It is very comfortable in the hand with this nice anchoring position, and the lightweight nature of it makes it so that the nib is where most of the weight is, and that makes for a very comfortable writing experience. And I like the idea that these micro grooves in this nib hold extra ink so that you can extend your writing session in between dips. But I do see areas for improvement with this pen. Sometimes those micro grooves collect more ink than the rest of them, and they can end up in burping. Another issue that I found with this pen is because of the symmetrical nature of it, you have to constantly rotate it, which can be a little bit tedious to write with over long periods of time. And I would also like to see a roll stop integrated into this pen design. I mentioned that a few times in this video, and as I write with it and work with it, I find that that is something that tends to be a little bit annoying. And then lastly, if you look closely, there is a bit of staining that's already happened on this wooden handle. And I have not used this pen very extensively in the month or so that I've owned it. But overall, I think this is a great tool, especially if you do a lot of ink swatching, because this will help prevent you having to go through a ton of Q-tips. And also, if you are learning calligraphy, this could be a great way to introduce some line variation without having to rely on flex nibs, stubs, or architects. And that just leaves me to say, thank you for watching.